So, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm sitting with someone whom I have the utmost respect for, and I think I've even mentioned it on Twitter that I really highly recommend you for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Thank you.
No, but I mean that with all sincerity. So everyone, I'm sure you know who this gentleman is. He is he's a living legend. He is Professor Tim Noakes. Professor Tim Noakes is pretty much the forerunner, or I would say the godfather of sports science medicine. And how many papers have you published?
Yeah, it's well over 500. I know some people claim it's 700. I don't know where they got that number from.
So you've done 500 papers on research. 500, and how many hours of work is that you?
Yeah, that's 40 or 50 years. So I've been in the game since 1969 when I started medicine, 1969. And then I got interested already in 71, 72. I'd already written my first scientific paper. So although I was training as a doctor, my bias was always towards science.
So I actually want to know what was your attraction to sports science medicine in the beginning?
I think it was quite simple. I started rowing in my first year of medical school. So I was very fortunate. The year before, I'd been in America as an exchange student. Yeah. And on the last day of schooling, I asked my best friend there, what sport is he going to play? Because, of course, I played cricket and rugby. Running, couldn't stand running. Anything that was an endurance, that wasn't for me. Yeah. So he said he was going to do crew or rowing. So I thought, gosh, that's a good idea. So immediately I went to UCT. I signed up for the rowing club. Right. And the first thing I realized was I had to get fit, and they would make us run. And I found that quite difficult. Uh-huh. And then, of course, the rowing started. And then you have to learn pain, as you know all about pain. So that was my introduction. Yeah. And then what happened, this is the iconic moment, was the coach for the British Olympic team was invited to come. Now this is 1969, and he comes to Cape Town and he gives a lecture to 20 of us at the university. And I remember him drawing a graph, and the graph was like this, you see. So here was the distance you'd rowed, and here was your blood lactic acid level. And so he said, and what happens is your blood lactic acid level shoots up, you see, and at 1,000 meters, it's already reached a high value, and that's why you feel so terrible. and I thought, no, I literally, this is not a lie. I literally walked out of that lecture theatre and said, that's what I'm going to study. So I was a first-year medical student. We hadn't yet started medicine. We hadn't started physiology. What happens next was that that was 69. 68 was a pivotal year in sports science, because what happened in 68 was the Olympic Games were held at altitude. And all of a sudden there was a problem, because people didn't know what happens when you go to altitude. Right. So all the leading nations sent their best scientists to study altitude physiology. And that was the first thing that happened. The second thing was happened, East Germany, for the first time, they competed as a separate country, and they did extremely well. And so the Americans realized that if they wanted to keep ahead, they had to invest in science. And that literally was the start of sports science. The modern sports science. Before there was lots of science, but it wasn't very critical or distinguished science. So that was 1968. There were so many things. There were a lovely picture of the famous. I'm not thinking it's a revolution, but when the guys held the black fist salute in the Olympics, which was the bravest moment in sport there's ever been, and that was very moving as well. So 69, and then in 70, I learnt about the muscle biopsy technique, where they were measuring muscle glycogen, which had just been introduced in 1967. And so which is actually interesting enough. Chris Froome, his latest YouTube video, in Israel, they're doing a muscle biopsy on him to this day. Mm. So then that was all glycogen. So now carbohydrates are the key to everything. Right, and that was simple. Now sports science was easy. You just had to do a muscle biopsy and measure muscle glycogen, and you were fine. Mm-hmm. And that then took us down that route that carbohydrates are essential. And we've been on that route for the last 50 years or so. So it all happened at the same time. And the point was that actually, if you were in sports science at that time, you could know pretty much everything in the field.
Right.
But now it's become highly specialized in more different areas. So you can't know as much about the field as we knew in those days.
Okay.
So
now, you've been, let's just say you started with the sports science 5 years on. What was your motivational factor to continue to pursue the field? What was fueling your sort of interest?
That's great. So then what I did was through my medical training. Yeah. So I had 6 years of medical training, and I always looked at what was the sports science application of what I was learning in the wards. And I realized I was much more interested in making people healthy than treating the diseased patients. I wasn't very good at that. And I realized there are many good doctors who are able to manage disease, but there weren't many of us trying to promote health. So I decided I better go to promote health, and that became my goal. So I did my internship, and that taught me this is not your line. You're not really good at this. Although I cared a lot for the patients, I couldn't cope with death. That it just was very difficult for me, and I couldn't cope with not knowing why things were happening. In medicine, we were then being told the why. We were being taught the why, but the why's gone from medicine. It's now is what's what and how. What's the diagnosis and how do you treat it? We'll just read the instructions like a cookbook, and this is how you treat the patient, and you're not allowed to do anything different from that. But no one asks why, and I was interested in why. So then the very first thing I did, so I went into research in cardiology, and the very first question we asked was, there was an American called, I'll have to remember his name for a second, Basler, and Tom Basler, and he'd said that if you ran a marathon, you'd never have a heart attack. You'd live forever, you'd never have a heart attack. And we had seen patients, we had seen reports. And so we started looking, and I went to a congress, the New York Academy of Sciences conference in New York City in 1976. And Basler was speaking, and by that time we had data showing he was wrong. So my prof, Lionel Opie, said, you must go to New York and you must go to the organizer and you say, you've got to be, I must be allowed to talk. Now I'm 28 or something. This is a major conference, got all the best scientists in the world.
Right.
So I go to the guy and I say, my Professor Opie says I'm a speaker. And he said, well, Professor Opie's the god, you see, so yes, you can speak. So I got to speak to this audience in the lunchtime.
Did you?
It's astonishing. I mean, it's still the best conference I ever went to.
Okay.
And so then I spoke, and people were very unhappy that I was conflicting with what they believed, or trying to disprove it. And so that was my introduction, that I'm interested in paradoxes, where it said that something is this way, and you can see it's not. And I realized that science is about disproof, and it's much easier to disprove stuff. And so I'm very well known for disproving all these things. And what we've just done, and you'll be glad to hear, is we've disproved a 100-year theory. I mean, it's fascinating, and why did we do it? Because we were the first people to dare to go against the stream, and that's. People you can't do it, because if you do, you get isolated and cancelled. And so I've been cancelled so often that it doesn't worry me anymore. One more cancellation won't matter.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely sitting amongst family over here, because I was very isolated at school. I was an outcast. I was this freaky-looking red-headed kid with porcelain white skin. I had a massive gap in my teeth.
Yeah.
I was Jew, then I also failed the standard I was terribly dyslexic. Yeah. So I've always been isolated. So I've kind of been schooled to be put into a corner and shunned. Yeah. So, like you say, you're so used to it. Likewise, I mean, it's kind of, I feel comfortable being isolated. Yeah. I feel comfortable in speaking my mind and not following the masses. And it's funny that nutrition stroke science is what effectively brought us together. Yeah. But so much of what we believe, and I don't want to digress because I want to get back to your journey. so much of what we believe, we vibrate on that same sort of frequency. Absolutely. About freedom, about not having your freedoms taken away from you, about health, and not becoming a puppet of what is unfortunately what we are facing in modern society. Exactly. Back to this conference, and now you've spoken out. You've said you've disproven this. What have you now disproven? This.
So Basil's hypothesis was if you ran a marathon, you couldn't die. You couldn't develop atherosclerosis in your coronary arteries. So when I spoke in New York, we had athletes who'd had heart attacks, and we could document heart attacks, and we could show that they had coronary artery disease, atherosclerosis in their coronary arteries, which he claimed you couldn't have. So then he changed the hypothesis, and he said, no one's died from it, and you haven't documented someone who died from that. So then it took us another 2 years before we found 5 or 6 people in South Africa who died, most of them during running marathons, and then we autopsied them, and we could show that they had the narrowing, and the narrowing had caused that had an obstruction, and then that had a heart attack. So that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which remains the top journal in the world. And we had 5 cases, and it's very seldom that you get 5 case reports published in the New England Journal of Medicine with an editorial. and they said it was cardiomythology, which we had disproved. You see, the cardiomythology, the mythology that you could live forever if you ran marathons.
Which clearly is not the case now. Yeah. And that also brings up the point that you may look like you're in good health, you may participate in sport, and you may be able to run a marathon or be a professional cyclist and ride at a certain speed or power output. But technically speaking, what you're saying is it is a possibility that you may in fact be underneath metabolically unhealthy.
That's it. Okay. And that's an area we're looking at now. That if you eat this high carbohydrate diet for 20 or 30 years, you can run all you like. But if you're like me, you're insulin resistant, and you eat this high carbs diet, it's just damaging you all along. Yeah. Now, in this paper where we disproved the 100-year hypothesis or theory, we also by chance measured glucose we monitored blood glucose levels for 24 hours a day for 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. In 10 athletes when they were eating high carb diet and versus the high fat diet. On the high fat diet, their glucose control was magnificent. They all looked unbelievable. On the high carb diet, 3 of them became pre-diabetic. Now, they became pre-diabetic without changing their weight, without changing the amount of energy expended, the exercise that they were doing.
And this is all in the papers and the research.
Yeah, this is
for people to actually go and have a look and
So that proves that it's the sugar, it's the carbohydrate that converted these people to pre-diabetes, because that's the only thing that changed.
And they were doing the running. They would
continue to run. Yeah, they weren't the world's best, but they were running 80 to 100 kilometers a week, and believing that they could that running was making them healthy, but. Well, I'm a classic example. I ran 70 marathons and ultra marathons and still got type 2 diabetes. And I got it because of my family history. My dad, diabetes is strong in the family. And when I go back and look at data collected on myself in 1978, 1979, so now I'm 28, 29, I was running at least 100 kilometers a week, usually 120. I was running marathons in a good time. I was lean. I had a body mass index of 21, and I was profoundly insulin resistant. My fasting insulin was 5 times normal on this high carbohydrate diet. And that's catastrophic. And, I didn't realize that eating this high carbs, because I was lean and athletic, I thought I'm fine. But very quickly, my exercise performance dropped off, very quickly in the 30s. And that wasn't age. It was purely this high carbohydrate diet and becoming pre-diabetic and then ultimately diabetic. Yeah.
So, I think from me personally, I'm very passionate about my beliefs. Yeah. However, my beliefs have slowly but surely been able to be malleable.
Yeah.
Malleable from the point of view that I don't discount other possibilities. Yeah. Now, I'm a huge animal-based advocate. Yeah. I'm almost carnivore, but I do love my English cucumber. And I really do believe carbohydrates is the majority of the problem with regards to metabolic health, weight gain, obesity. However, I will not discount that there are some people out there that they just prefer, there's something about their anatomy, genetics, makeup, which they just function better on carbohydrate. And I won't discount that. I'll never ever, I have a philosophy, I have adopted a principle called live and let live. Yeah. Don't shun other people and be able to listen. But you once mentioned that you reckon that 10% of the world's population a high-fat, low-carbohydrate wouldn't work for.
Yeah.
How do you come up with...
Because I agree with you. There are some people who don't benefit by this diet, and they put on weight on the diet, and their performance goes down. Yeah. So it has to be. You can't take 100% of the people and expect them all to be identical and adapt to this. However, what I do know is that humans evolved to eat the diet that you're eating, and we've been doing that for 4 million years. And then it's only in the last 18,000 years or so that we moved towards an agricultural diet. And I'm sure if you come from the Persian Gulf and that area where the grains were first developed and farming was developed, I'm sure that those populations are much better at coping with carbohydrates than the rest of us. I come from the north of England. Well, the north of England was under ice 6,000 years ago. We weren't eating cereals and grains. Yeah. We were eating sheep and other things. Yeah.
It's actually very interesting because one of my motivating factors for leaving carbohydrates behind was the fact I became not became, I always have been gluten and wheat intolerant. And coming from an Orthodox Jewish background, Ashkenazi, we grew up with the challah and the matzah. My siblings, we always used to joke when it was Pesach that it's a week of being constipated. Yeah. And I remember when I went overseas to Israel, my late father was a pharmacist. Yeah. And he gave me a box of Imodium, and I said, Dad, well, what's this for? So he goes, it's if you get diarrhea. I said, Dad, if I get diarrhea, it's a blessing, because I grew up being constipated. And if you look, the Ashkenazi gene pool, they're missing a genetic gene that helps them to metabolize gluten and wheat, but yet it's in our in the culture, Jewish in the culture to eat this, yes, and it's actually making us ill. And that was the light bulb moment. It's because we listen to dogma, and it's what the priest, the imam, the rabbi says. We accept what the doctor says. We take it as gospel, and hence we keep on pushing through. And so I realized, hang on, my family, from my mother to my father's side, both sides, are all dying of cancers and cancers and cardiovascular issues. Why is this? What they keep on doing the same thing over and over, and it's the food. It literally was that. It's the food. It's the food. So that was my kind of light bulb moment. Your light bulb moment was, I believe, and I'll let you tell the story, was kind of out of, I think there was a little bit of restraint, resentment. It was like, this can't be for real. What actually happened? I mean, what was the outcome?
So for 30 years, I've been working on this book about being over drinking during exercise, waterlogged, which had been promoted by the industry, and it killed people. And we'd warned people that they would die if they followed those guidelines, and they did. And so I was ostracized for that. So the American College of Sports Medicine is funded by the industry that was causing the problem. And the industry was getting the ACSM to produce the guidelines, and it was influencing this chief scientist. So it had a group of scientists who it funded. And so they knew that they would come up with whatever the company wanted, they would be put into the guidelines. So when I said the guidelines are wrong, and they're causing problems, I got ostracized by the American College of Sports Medicine. So that was my first real ostracization. This was before I started promoting the low-carb diet. Anyway, I finished the book and I sent it off to the publishers by email one night. And in the middle of the night, I hadn't been running much. My brain said, get up and run tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, and you better keep running for the rest of your life, you see. So I got up and I had the worst run I've ever had in my life. And as I came home, I mean, this was a pivotal key moment.
Yeah.
I opened my emails and there was an advert, lose 6 pounds in 6 weeks on the Atkins diet. And I said, but Atkins tried to kill us, you see. And the 3 authors, I knew well. I knew they're good scientists. And I had a great respect for them. Yeah. And I said, but they've sold out to Atkins. This is a disgrace. So I drove down to the local bookshop.
So it was these 3 scientists whom you knew from a peer perspective.
I'm just going to give you a little background there before we continue. One of them was Steve Phinney. And Steve Phinney in 1984, he wrote the first paper showing that you could adapt to a high-fat diet and your performance could stay the same or get better slightly. And he published that in 1984. And of course I read the paper, but somebody else read the paper. Paula Newby-Fraser. Now Paula may not be well known, but she's the greatest triathlete of ever. And I'd been helping her in 1983, 1984, and then she'd gone to America. And she read the article and she phoned me and she said, Tim, I've just read Steve Phinney's article. Do you think I should put more fat into my diet? So I said, Paula, I think that's a really good idea. You see, but that's all I said. After she'd won 28 Ironman triathlons, including 8 Hawaiian Ironmans, she said, the most important piece of advice I ever got was from Tim Noakes. To cut the carbs. But I never said cut the carbs. I just said eat more fat. Because at this very time I'm telling her to eat more fat, I'm telling everyone else to eat more carbs. So I could keep the 2 ideas in my head at the same time. So that's why I knew exactly who Steve Phinney was. Okay. And now he comes along and says, no, you must follow the Atkins diet. So anyway, I read the book. Well, should I say, I opened the book, and within 2 hours I said, oh my gosh, these guys have got all the evidence, and I was wrong. And I said, that's it, no more carbs. And that happened on that day, the 12th of December 2010. That was the moment. That was the light
of December 2010.
And I just stopped eating carbs that day and never looked back.
When you say you stopped eating carbs, what were those carbs that you specifically...
Oh gosh, it was typical, the breakfast of grains and what are these cereals and all that. And it would be lots of bananas, lots of sports drinks, lots of coffee and tea with buckets of sugar in them, lots of apples, bananas, oodles of bread and oodles of potatoes. I mean, the carb content was probably 600 grams. It was 60%, 70%.
And you weren't doing any like minimal fat. You might have some margarine.
Margarine, absolutely. Yeah. And no, you should cut the fat off. But I was raised by my mother, who came from a family that promoted meat. They sold meat. Okay. So she raised me on a carnivore diet. Oh. So I was very lucky about that. And Paula was also lucky because Paula said, but I'd always eaten. She was from Zimbabwe. We'd always eaten biltong. Yeah. So it was easy for her to eat a high-fat diet, high-protein, high-fat diet. So I converted because in 1976 I go into cardiology and the professors say you must eat this diet. And who are you going to say don't eat this diet? And I'd read all the literature and it seemed to show that this was the diet that we needed. And it was all bogus science. And it took me 30 years to realize it was completely bogus science. Yeah.
Now, let's talk the law of running.
Yeah.
You wrote this little book. this little booklet. How much research would you say went into this book? And I think there's now been 3 publications.
5. It's 4 versions. I'm writing the 5th version.
You're writing the 5th. Yeah. So with a change to nutrition. Yeah. Okay.
So you say, well, it was a lifetime because when I started running seriously in 1973, I ran my first marathon, 72 actually, and then Comrade 73. And it was all that information. And I started writing a regular column in Runner's World, the local Runner's World, in 1976, just as I started. And then I started writing every month. I would write an article somewhere, much like blogging, but it was long before blogs. And then in 1981, I thought, well, I've got enough evidence here to write a book, you see. So then I cut and pasted everything. And then I realized, no, I haven't got a book. So then I spent 4 years writing the rest. And 85, the first edition came out. Yeah. And then I revised it, like 85, probably 1990 I revised it. And then 2000 I revised it again. So it would be an additional 5 or 10 years of knowledge. And the reason I wrote the book was because I was just learning physiology. Because I was just starting sports science at UCT, and I was learning the physiology, and much of what I was teaching I was putting into the book.
Okay.
So it was 20 or 30 years of research and wisdom that went into the book. I'm glad to report that I'm much more wise now.
I have to. So there's a famous. I can't find it anymore, but there's a famous segment or video of you tearing out.
That's right.
This book is fantastic, except for the one chapter on nutrition. You can just tear it out. It's a lot lighter, but you pocket now.
You know what's funny is that I'm kind of in the extreme. Maybe that was a bit. I was asked to do that. You see. Okay. So I thought, well, that's a good idea, because actually the stuff I tore out. What's interesting is it's actually correct, but it's wrong. It's correct but completely wrong. Okay. So it's a report of what the science show if you carbohydrate adapted. Okay. So if you only eat a high carbohydrate diet, that material is all correct. Yeah. But it doesn't have anything about people eating high fat diets, and the fact that on a high fat diet you don't get all these issues that you have to address. Yeah. So what I'm doing now, and I'm rewriting that chapter, it's astonishing. I'm going right back to the beginning of the exercise metabolism studies, which interestingly the first I ever heard was at the New York Academy of Sciences conference. Warren and Feilig spoke about metabolism and their studies of metabolism during exercise, and they were the first really to do it. That was the opening of the field. Yeah. So I'm going back to all their work, and it's fabulous, because what I've got now, I've got a model of how I think the body works metabolically. And so I can go through all these papers, and I have to be able to explain the outcomes of all of them based on my model. If I can't explain them on my model, then I'm wrong. I've got to modify it. And so far the model's holding up incredibly well, and it's unbelievably simple. It's so simple, which I can tell you. Yeah. So when we started sports science, the guy who helped us was Professor Wieland Gebers, and he gave the first lecture on metabolism. And I know now that he took it from this particular article. Uh-huh. And the article was published in 1971. It was the Banting lecture, not this Banting, but the Banting guy who discovered insulin. So it was the Banting Memorial Lecture, and he spoke about the physiology of insulin, which of course is the problem that, as you mentioned, carbohydrates, insulin are the problem. And in the opening line, he says, the first rule of metabolism is that humans were designed to keep the blood glucose level in a very narrow range, homeostatically, and it drops everything. As soon as you eat carbs, you destroy that control. And now you've got to bring out the insulin, and you've got to do everything you possibly can to get the glucose back to normal. Right. And everything is focused on that. So as soon as you understand that the whole focus of our metabolic control is to keep the blood glucose normal. In your case, of course, it's when you're not eating carbs, it's got to keep it up. Right. But for most people eating carbs, it's got to get it down. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's where most of the control is. We don't have much control to raise it. We apologize. We have lots of controls to raise it, but we only have insulin to bring it down. So insulin is key to everything.
That is actually, it's so true, because when I can feel when I need to have some sort of glucose. I mean, I eat a lot more protein to do that. Yeah, yeah. I find that I get ravenous for lean meat. Yeah. And I find I start really and one of the how I sort of maintain from a personal my sort of reserves is muscle mass. My muscle mass, because it actually eats. I believe my body eats into my muscle to utilize that as fuel.
Well, this paper discusses that very point. Yeah. So it said that, and then I realized, okay, so what happens when you take carbs? The whole focus is get rid of the carbs. That's got to get rid of it. And it does it one of three ways, or all three together. The first is it burns carbohydrates instead of fats. And now so then I can go and look at our studies, which we did in the 1990s, where we infused insulin or we infused glucose into patients, or we exercise them with a low muscle glycogen. They start with low muscle glycogen, and it's astonishing. If you do that, your insulin is so low, because then you just turn on fat. So insulin is the key driver, but you have to get insulin really low for your body to work properly. And that's why you work so well, is because your insulin is so low all the time.
Yeah.
The fasting insulin in most people is so high that it's already destroyed that metabolism. You can't access the fat metabolism appropriately. So anyway, so the first thing you do is you secrete insulin, and that turns off fat metabolism, and instead you burn carbohydrates. The second is you dump the glucose. Now this is what's novel, because no one has ever suggested this, that you dump the glucose into your liver and your muscle so that it gets out quickly. But it's dumping. It's not there as a fuel for energy or for exercise.
It wants to get
You've
rid
got
of
to
it.
get rid of it. And then any extra excess is turned into fat in the liver, and then it's transported around the body. So those are the three things that happen. And when you see it that way, we spent our lives, 20 years, trying to get you to exercise and save your muscle glycogen, because we were under the belief that, it's the final sprint. You need all the glycogen left. When Chris Froome is going to sprint at the end of the Tour de France, he must have glycogen in his muscles so he can sprint. And we could never get that. But we went for 20 years trying to find the solution. We couldn't. And we never gave up, because we were convinced that the next experiment would do it. But what happens is, the instant you start exercising, if you've got lots of glycogen, the body says, thank goodness, I can finally get rid of this stuff that's been dumped in my muscle. What happens is the body says, okay, let's burn this glycogen.
Yeah.
And you can't store or save it. And because why? Because the body knows that in the next meal it's going to have this huge bolus of carbohydrate coming in, it's better get rid of it. So my conclusion is that the only reason humans burn carbohydrate is to regulate the blood glucose concentration.
You were talking about to regulate the blood glucose concentration. So now, from my experience, for somebody who has been very focused on being a low carb, high fat, I stopped taking milk in my cappuccino during my ride, because if I would ride for say 3 hours and I'd just have that little bit of, I would actually get hypoglycemic.
You would.
That's why I stopped taking milk. So I figured that out. I said, geez, but it's such a small amount. It's such a small amount of milk.
But that would cause your insulin to rise, and then that
switches off your fat.
And that switches fat,
and then it starts looking for sugar.
What interests me about you, and I just wish I still had a laboratory, because I'd love to study you in full detail, because you break all the rules. Because you cannot produce enough glucose from the liver the way you live. You can't during exercise. Impossible. You have to become hypoglycemic, except if you're burning fat. If you're turning that fat into glucose.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, my other half, who is also ketogenic, and she's a Swiss lady, was vegetarian for 20 years. She used to eat a kilogram of chocolate every night, and then she met me, became ketogenic, started eating, she's as bad as me when it comes to, well, not bad, but as much as when it comes to eating. She would get amazed, because I would eat a liter of yogurt. Now there's still carbohydrates in yogurt, and she says, but it's impossible. You'd get kicked out. You get kicked out of ketosis. So I would eat it, because I can eat a liter of full fat yogurt in one day. I need to. If I'm going to go and ride, I need to. I just, from where my standpoint is that if I have the fuel in board, or the right fuel on board pre my exercise, I can go forever. I can go forever. It's only during the exercise, if I take on board something, it might actually, when I don't need to. And hence I can do those extended thresholds. Post 5 hours of riding, and not gentle riding, tempo riding. I've burned 3,000-4,000 calories. There's no glycogen left. Okay, where's that energy coming from? So that is my experience.
Yeah.
But I may be just...
No, you're not. And you are unique in many ways. But so the study that we're publishing shortly is, I can't give you the full details because I didn't want to anticipate, but we found massive states of fat oxidation. If we were to study you, you could cover everything with your fat oxidation, except your blood glucose. That's the problem. So what happens is you can burn so much fat that you can do almost essentially anything on it. You can run a 2-hour marathon, I think, on a high-fat diet. What you can't do is what you do, is that you can't go 5 hours without taking carbohydrate. That's impossible. Okay, and it's impossible because what happens during exercise...
I've gone 8 hours.
I know, which is impossible. So I'll repeat. And it's impossible because the liver now... what happens is your blood glucose... let me rephrase that. When you exercise, you turn off carbohydrate metabolism and you turn on fat metabolism. In your case, you never turn on carbohydrate metabolism. You're almost completely burning fat. However, there's a tiny amount of glucose that you have to use for some reason. We don't understand it. And that glucose use rises during exercise. So the total carbohydrate is going down. In your case, it's always low. But for the average athlete, they start burning lots of carbohydrate and then it starts falling. So we thought that all carbohydrate use would be falling, but it's not. The glucose in the blood, its use goes up and up and up. And now the only way you can produce that glucose is through the liver. Now, so you have to have some carbohydrate to help produce that glucose. You can get it from protein, you can get it from fat, but it's never fast enough. Once you've gone 5 or 6 hours, you're in trouble and you're going to become hypoglycemic. And you don't. Yeah. But now if you think you're developing a human being 4 million years ago, and you're saying, okay, now we're going to have to make this animal a fat burner, then you say, well, what happens when he wants to run a marathon or cycle for 8 hours? Okay, we've got to make fat be converted into glucose to keep the brain ticking over. And so we would argue, yes, well, that's fine because you've got gluconeogenesis and it can make it from protein and fat. But it's not enough. We've studied it's not enough. You have to have something else which has not been measured. And to me, that's converting free fatty acids directly to glucose.
I mean, the way I was thinking about it is my muscle mass. And the leaner I get, and I can drop the weight so quickly. The weaker I get. Meaning, when I lose muscle mass, so when I shrink, I don't just lose body fat. There's the actual muscle bellies, the actual size of the skeletal muscle gets smaller. I feel it in my clothes. I mean, when I wear lycra, and what I think, and I'm the furthest thing away from a scientist. These are all hypotheses which I've thought about extensively. I think it really is because I have a healthy muscle mass, which is a natural way, from my perspective, a healthier way to feed and fuel my endeavors.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we know that if you take carbohydrates, that protects your muscles because you don't break them down as much for fuel. So what happens if you're on a zero carbohydrate diet and doing all the exercise you're doing? You're going to break your muscle down. Yeah. And the only way to prevent that is by eating a high protein diet. And most people don't get enough protein in the diet to do that. No,
I can eat a whole cow. So it's not a problem. What was the because for the people watching, Prof Noakes for me is somebody whom I keep in my mind, my conscience when I go out there to prove what I would like to prove and to disprove dogma. And what was your turning moment where you kind of felt a responsibility?
Okay. Yeah. You know, I initially didn't feel a responsibility, but I watched my dad die of type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
And he died in 1992, and so for the 4 years before that, when I'm heavily involved in promoting carbohydrates and so on, and so he was being treated on a high carbohydrate diet and so on, and no one considered that was wrong. And so the treatment killed him. I'm not suggesting that if I'd been around and he'd been on a high-fat diet, we might have prevented it. Hopefully we would have been able to give him a bit longer life. But so I watched him die, and it was just terrible because he just was such a giant in my life. He's such an amazing person, and he just shrunk to nothing, you know. And then his brain went because of strokes and so on. He lost both legs, and he had to be carried around and so on. It was just awful. And I thought, well, that's how it works. You can't do anything about it. And then when I read the books by Westman, and then I got type 2 diabetes myself, I knew I had 10 years to sort the problem out because my dad died 10 years after the diagnosis. So I had, in 2010, I suddenly realized I've got 10 years to sort the problem out. Well, I'm going to die the same way he did. And that made me motivated. And then as I learned that you could reverse type 2 diabetes by eating a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, that became the focus of the Nokes Foundation, that we want to tell people around the world that this is the way you prevent this terrible disease, because if you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, you will die from the condition, and you will die this way. There's no way out, and if you just take the pills and so on, they don't make a difference.
Now, we jump ahead a few years, and we come to that whole I mean, you're currently going through another Twitter debacle, but we come to the tweet about winning the
winning babies on the low carb.
I would never ever, I always say this: if you love your children, never ever give them sugar.
Exactly.
That's my.
Exactly.
I keep on putting up. I'm sure I upset my sister. That's another story. A wonderful story to explain how the evidence is there. I've got. I love my brother-in-law and I love my sister. She's got an inactive thyroid now. She's had endless chronic illnesses, and she's unfortunately completely out of shape. Likewise for her husband, and I adore them. The children, the daughter, my niece, who I'm absolutely proud of, she was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease.
Gosh.
Completely reversed the condition, lost 45 kilograms. Lost 45 kilograms, went keto. I broke my collarbone too. I had to spend a week there. She asked me a couple of questions. She's a movie star now. Her endocrinologist doesn't know how she did it. And my nephew, this guy's, he's 15 years old. He's bench pressing 10 kilograms more than his own body weight. Okay, he came out of his room the one day and said, "Mom, don't ever buy me chocolates again," because he watched this. This is this generation. This generation.
Fantastic.
Watched her, his sister metamorphosize, and this guy, they did it themselves. Which is,
that's so exciting.
it just gives me so much pride when I see it. But now we at this debacle with regards to what happened, the repercussions of what actually happened. What was your initial thoughts? Because your intention is to do good, is to help people. So what was your initial thoughts over there?
So there were two issues. The first was that tweet. And I was reported the next day for straying out of my lane and promoting a diet that would kill millions. That's what I was accused of. That if you wean children onto the high-fat, low-carb diet, you'll kill millions. So that's what they were trying to prove. The problem was that the dietary guidelines in South Africa are exactly as I said. And the person who drew up the guidelines was the chief expert witness for the prosecution. I couldn't believe it, in a rational world. We could have met around a table and I would have just produced, these are the guidelines, this is what I said, this is the book, this is what we said, this is a low-carb, high-fat diet. It includes everything you say in your guideline. So what's the problem? She said, you didn't mention cereals. So that was the problem, because you didn't mention weaning children on cereals, which is the last thing you want to do. And the evidence is absolutely clear that if you raise your children on animal protein, they do much better. And for a person in Africa not to know that is horrendous. But it turns out, of course, industry was way behind it, and they were funded by industry.
Yeah. From my perspective, most of the cures to chronic illnesses, modern lifestyle illnesses, is actually fasting.
Yeah.
Which, in effect, you'll save money from healing yourself.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a household where if we had the slightest sniffle, we were given an antibiotic.
Yeah, exactly.
I came from the age of the 80s of penicillin.
Yeah.
I've got a sore throat, here's some penicillin. And my late father, it just was it was like there was antibiotics in the house for almost everything, which actually ruined my immune system.
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I grew up in a high carbohydrate environment, yeah. And that was. And the way from my outlook as one person out of 8 billion people on this planet, I believe we are programmed to be ill. We are programmed to feed this big engine.
Yeah, of course.
And we are, to use a better, the only word I can, we're slaves.
Yeah,
we are slaves to a system.
Yeah, exactly.
And modern medicine is reactive. It's not proactive, and the problem with being proactive is that you're going to put all the doctors out of business. The hospital beds will stay empty, and Big Pharma will have to, I don't know, set up a market at Green Market Square and sell some souvenirs. But because we are feeding this big engine.
Yeah, exactly right.
We are feeding this big engine.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I even look at the cycling world, the problem with the cycling world is that we and connection. Social media is lends itself for people to have short memories.
Yeah, yeah.
Short memories, we forget about history.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And history gets written out.
Correct.
Yeah.
We forget about history. If we look at the cycling greats,
yeah.
we look at the first 5-time winner of the Tour de France, Jacques Anquetil.
Yeah.
He died of stomach cancer.
Yeah.
We look at Laurent Fignon.
Yeah.
He died of stomach cancer. We look at the likes of the greatest cyclist of all time, Eddie Merckx.
Yeah.
The guy is, unfortunately, I'm not being disrespectful to his achievements, but he's swollen. He is not in good health.
Yeah.
He's not in good health. Greg LeMond has just been diagnosed with leukemia.
Yeah.
He's got cancer.
Yeah.
Okay, and also he's not in good health.
No,
okay,
sorry.
Why do we pay such reverence to people whom we forget about eventually? And we pay such reverence at the expense of our own health because they do it.
Mm. Mm.
Why can't we actually look at ourselves from an independent vessel and say, what's actually going to be good for me, instead of following the masses? We are so prone to not thinking out of the box.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is the biggest problem, because we want to be accepted. They do it, and then we've got this problem, which I think is a problem, is that there isn't transparency with regards to what is good for an individual. And as I said in the beginning, with regards to, I don't discount other people, what their requirements may not be my requirements, but there is this absolute push with regards to industry, in the endurance, in the sports world, that everybody is the same.
Yeah.
And I saw a wonderful little meme saying that if your doctor prescribes you drugs or gives you a prescription without asking about your sleep patterns, your stress levels, your exercise, and your nutrition, okay, and just prescribes you medication, he's effectively just a drug dealer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly right.
Okay. He's not actually, or she is not actually guiding you in proper health. They call them a health practitioner. It's almost like an oxymoron. Okay. So with regards to the sports world, sport is equated to health.
Yeah.
Okay. So I see, every time I see a person, now I'm not going to hold my P's and Q's over here. Lycra doesn't lie, okay? When it comes to cycling, Lycra doesn't lie.
Exactly.
And you see a person whom shouldn't necessarily require calories, and they inhaling, sucking down that gel, okay? Now, from my perspective, that is not feeding energy, that's feeding an addiction.
Yeah, it is exactly right.
Okay, and that is a very interesting, and people cannot actually equate something which their doctor tells them you must eat a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. That's what my doctor tells me. They would never ever contemplate. They have that feeling of euphoria after consuming a sugary product. And what I would like to see, like they put on tobacco, is I would like to see health warnings. Please note that the high consumption of this, it may lead to type 2 diabetes, may lead to unnecessary caloric consumption, and then of course there is this, I would say, this apathetic, this to appease the masses, that you can no longer even tell somebody that, listen, you are overweight, you need to lose weight. That is almost now deemed as offensive.
Yeah, exactly right.
And you can't, which is preposterous, which is mad.
Yeah.
So then it brings me to the next thing. Have we eaten a diet for such a long period, removing the healthy fats from our diet, okay, that have caused us to become, lose our cognitivity, lose our rational behavior and the ability to think rationally? So we've all these processed oils, all these unhealthy products that have now been exchanged for these fats which were vilified. Do you think, would you completely, let me rephrase it, would you say it is a likelihood that it could have programmed us, meaning that it's created a population that is more malleable from a mind manipulation perspective?
Yeah,
I mean, that is a very far out thought, but it's something which I keep on thinking about, because how society and population has changed with the attitudes and the outlooks on life.
Well, I mean, if we take the coronavirus example, I mean, there we've been completely manipulated. The thinking of humans has been utterly, completely manipulated. And so there I do agree, and there are people who suggest that the so-called vaccine may be influencing our ability to think rationally. But I'm not going to go that far. I'm going to say you may well have a point, but I'm not sure that that's all that important. Well, maybe it is, but it's the way we're raised today. That's what's happening, and all the media that we read, and the mainstream media is just a bunch of lies. That's all it is. And people are listening to this and accepting it as the fact. I read very recently that people can be divided into two groups. Those who outsource their knowledge to the experts, and they will not question the experts because it's their character. Their character is, the expert is right, so I don't have to worry. And as soon as you say, well, the expert's wrong, then their whole character becomes a problem and they become anxious. And so they're not prepared to go down that route, so they just say we'll outsource everything to the experts. And that is increasingly happening. Whereas we sit on the other side and we say, no, I'd like to look at the evidence myself.
Well, see, I think that's the problem with regards to how this pandemic was orchestrated. I think that's probably a better word, is because I don't think there's one citizen on this planet that's actually gone to the government and said, well, actually now show me the deaths, show me this show me the blood work. Show me the blood work. Not one we just inhale it as if it's the oxygen we need to breathe. We will criticize the government for misappropriation of funds and our taxes, but it's, as soon as they tell us this is going to be good for our health, we're lining up to get a shot.
Yeah.
The way I view this pandemic is, when I say it's unfortunately a disease of the mind, is when you see a single person driving in a car with their windows closed with a mask on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you know it is that's all the evidence you need.
Yeah.
That's all the evidence you need. You don't need to go any further. They have basically said that the human has evolved so much over the last 60 years. The immune system is no longer we no longer have an immune system. We have to now synthetically get one. So that is my outlook on the whole subject. History is very important because we forget about history. And I've heard you mention a very nice gentleman by the name of Professor Klaus Schwab, whom I honestly believe was somehow behind, and this is just my belief, somehow behind Ansel Keys and his cherry-picked little experiment, which basically created a diet whereby society would remove the most essential nutrients for the human brain, and take away one of the most essential food nutrients for health, to create an unhealthy society, and a society which can be easily manipulated. Even if we look at the endocrine system of the male, the male's testosterone has, I do stand to be corrected, once again, I'm not a scientist, I'm just saying what I've heard and read. The male testosterone level, the average male testosterone level from the 70s was about 30% higher, if I'm not mistaken, than of the average today. So, and that has got to do with the overconsumption of carbohydrates, the removals of cholesterol out of the diet. And so if you emasculate the population, they're easier to control. So, and that is how I see what has transpired. And there is definitely, unfortunately, that I'm going to say this, a very sinister undertone with regards to what's happened to society. And that is one of the reasons why I do what I do, because it all starts, what I believe, with the foods that we eat. And I have a big philosophy about I will not encroach on your freedoms. Please don't do it to me. And the same sort of thing, we can even when a government takes away the rights to personal ownership of arms and ammunition, you cannot trust the government. You cannot, because it just means that they just want to overpower you. And that is one of the most passionate and views I feel. So, getting on to the Nokes Foundation, for me, the Nokes Foundation is more than just your health. It's got to do with your personal freedoms.
Exactly right.
And that is why I resonate so strongly with it. And when I'm on your webpage, for me it gives me so much pride. It's probably one of the proudest. It's really it's for what I stand for. And I really live a very modest lifestyle, but it's just what I stand for. I just want to have something, be some sort of light to other people. Say, just try and think, just try and think out of the box. Just try and think out of the box.
And that's what's being taken from everyone.
Exactly.
That's
the right to think. When Professor Klaus Schwab turns around and says he wants to put brain chips in your brain, and so you can sit there and know what you're thinking, and basically you'll just become programmable robots.
Exactly.
It's evil.
And I don't think people understand just how bad it is, and that we are in the Third World War and we have to keep fighting.
Well, 80 years ago, at least we knew that we had to land on Normandy Beach.
That's right.
I would be very scared now to land with today's people on Normandy Beach, because they would be running. They wouldn't have the courage
to go forward.
To go forward.
That's right.
And it's something which is I don't take it lightly. I don't take it lightly. So, but listeners, I think what we'll do is we'll end the conversation. I'm going to edit it.